The following is a conversation with David Durand, a sports performance and psychology coach, author, and a founder of Real Development LLC. David's groundbreaking work bridges the gap between mental health, physical performance, and skill development for athletes. His innovative approach, detailed in his book B.E.T, focuses on regulating the nervous system to unlock an athlete's full potential. I'm Sid Ben Salah, and this is a Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast. Today we'll dive into David's journey, his unique methods, and the challenges Gen Z athletes face in today's world. Let's get started. Welcome to the show, David.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to talk.
Your book introduces the B.E.T framework, breath, eyes, and touch. It's a compelling concept that blends the mind and body. Can you break down the B.E.T methods for our listeners?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think, when we talk about the nervous system, we're talking about the brain and the body and, the nervous system being this highway that information travels down from the brain and up from the body and communication all throughout us. And so when, we're playing sports, especially athletes, they're making decisions so quickly and so much is happening at the nervous system level that we're not even aware of. And so I see breath, eyes, and touch as three avenues for influencing our nervous system. And I use the word regulating, just meaning control, to help us have some self-control, especially amidst a sports environment where there may be things outside of our control, what our opponents are doing or what our coach is saying or what our teammates are doing, to be able to have that control within ourselves, to be able to regulate our own nervous system states, so that when we need to be energized, we can be energized. When we need to stay composed under pressure, we can stay composed under pressure. And then the breath and the eyes and the touch are just three, sensory modalities that we can activate and use to our benefit to be able to control that nervous system, to control our brain, get into a better mental state, to be able to control our body, stay composed, and execute, the proper decisions, actions, movements in the sports performance context.
Mm-hmm. And what makes it specifically effective for young athletes?
Yeah, so I think, part of that is because we're seeing more dysregulation, I think, than ever. And by dysregulation, I just mean our nervous systems, nowadays, especially with adolescents, we talk about the mental health crisis. Their nervous systems are so dysregulated, they're in a kind of chronic fight or flight mode. And so I talk about, different modes of nervous system in the book, and kind of the three modes are like, okay, connection mode. That's, when you're connected with yourself, you're connected with other people, you're connected with your surroundings. That's where we want to live. But we can also be in action mode. Action mode is when you're just on the gas pedal. It's go, go, go. Things are a little chaotic, overwhelming. This is kind of, anxiety, if we were to put a mental health or a clinical label on it. And then we have shutdown mode. Shutdown mode is when we just get stressed for too long. We're in that go, go, go action state for too long, and we just simply run out of gas. We crash. Clinically, that would be more like kind of depression, where you see the, lethargy, the fatigue, the kind of giving up, so to speak. And so you have these three modes, and I would say that more than ever, we see adolescents nowadays, these young athletes, chronically activated, chronically in fight or flight, living in that action mode, just go, go, go. And then they're there too long, they don't bring themselves into connection mode, and they end up in shutdown. And then it's kind of this vicious cycle of going from shutdown mode to action mode, shutdown mode to action mode, where they're way too stressed, and then they end up crashing, and then they get stressed again, and then they end up crashing. And so I think it's relevant to today's athletes because we're facing so much nervous system dysregulation in that population of athletes. And then also, I think it's very simple. It's very simple to, channel your energy, your attention into your breath, into your eyes, into your touch. This isn't a 15-step process and going through, different goal setting things and doing different visualization and imagery. All that stuff is great, but I think it's very simple just to be like, hey, if you breathe right now and you extend your exhale longer than your inhale, you are calming down your body and your mind. You're activating kind of the brake pedal, and you're calming down yourself. And so just simple tools and exercises like that activate our nervous system regulation through breath, eyes, and touch. I think, one, it's needed, and then two, it can be really simple.
Yeah. Can you share a story or two about how your solution or this method had the transformative impact?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love the sport of volleyball for many reasons. And what's really cool about volleyball is that they have huddles, right? In between like each play, they huddle. Whether you win the point or you lose the point, your team huddles together. So I love that social element, but it also allows for time for regulation. A sport like basketball, it's very fast paced. And there's not a ton of breaks. Sure, there's timeouts or like a dead ball or, end of quarters, but the action can go for a while and you're just running back and forth, back and forth. With volleyball, like I said, each point you have a little bit of a break. And so one thing that I like to do is to instill some strategies within that time where they're huddling and have a break. And so, for instance, I've worked with volleyball teams and a number of players where they're about to go serve the ball. Well, maybe it was a really intense play before. They just won the point, so now they've got the serve, so everybody's kind of hyped up, everybody's energized. Well, that could be good energy, or maybe that player made a mistake and isn't feeling great about themselves, and they kind of have some more negative energy. Regardless of the situation, when they go back to serve, teaching them to take a moment and settle their breath. So take a moment before you serve, make sure that you're extending that exhale so you don't feel rushed by the energy that's inside of you to just hurry up and get this over with and get back to playing. So breath and then eyes. Where are you focusing your eyes? Are you just kind of there but you're not really there? Are you making sure that you're looking at the ball as you're making, big hand contact on it? And then touch, like taking a second when you're breathing and you're about to serve to really focus on like, how does that ball, feel right now in your hand? Like, how are your feet feeling kind of in your shoes? Just taking a moment to kind of ground yourself in that moment. So that way we're not rushing past it, but rather we're kind of living in it and then going to the next one voluntarily. So even just seeing that in players, that has helped them settle their energy. So that way they control their energy and the energy doesn't control them in the game.
Yeah, interesting, David. Gen Z athletes navigate a world dominated by social media pressure and societal expectations. It's a unique environment. How has social media reshaped the athletic experience for this generation, David?
Yeah, there's a lot of different avenues. I feel like I could go with that one, but I'll kind of piggyback on what I was saying of, the problem of dysregulation, the problem of just adolescents being so stressed. And part of that is, let's just take an adolescent, spending on average, at least in the States, 4 to 6 hours per day on just social media platforms, not just screens. And so that's a lot of scrolling, right? They're exposing themselves to hundreds, probably thousands of images and videos a day, images that are highly filtered and edited, and everybody looks better than them and has a better life than them. So if you're doing this, right, and unconsciously or consciously, kind of judging and comparing yourself, which if we know anything, we know that humans are built for social comparison. So you're going to do that regardless of whether you want to or not. You're comparing yourself and everyone looks better than you, is prettier than you, more attractive, more skilled, X, Y, and Z, has a better life than you. Then we're going to come to, we're going to start getting stressed and we're start getting anxious because we feel like we're not enough, right? And evolutionarily, we're wired to have these negative emotions, of maybe anxiety, maybe shame, maybe embarrassment, maybe anger. These negative emotions are going to start kind of stirring us up, and they're going to get our nervous system, they're going to start activating that fight or flight because we're kind of in a danger zone. We're in a danger zone of not being enough, where everybody else is better than us and we might get left behind. So simply just by scrolling and consuming so much social media, we could be dysregulating our nervous system. And if we do that again and again for hours and hours, every day, weeks on weeks, months on months, then, I don't think it takes a brain surgeon to be like, okay, well, if we do that, then you're going to move from that, state of anxiety into more of kind of like a depression or like discouragement. And so I'm talking more clinically right now, but to relate that to, athletes specifically, well, if you're consuming a bunch of, social media, one, that's going to tire your brain. Right, so a thing called mental fatigue, which we know plays a big role in sports performance, especially in injury risk. So if you're consuming media before you go to practice, right, social media, or before you play a game, you're already decreasing, your ability to perform because it's another stimulus that your brain is processing, and so you're creating some mental fatigue there that doesn't really need to be there. So that's one thing, and then I can talk about maybe a side note would be like social media and sleep, but we can tuck that in our back pockets for now. But then when you get on the court, you're practicing and training, you've been exposing yourself to, videos, you've been getting these little hits of dopamine reward and doing no work for it. So like, 14 or 15-year-old athlete who kind of has all of that dopamine going on in their brain, kind of excitation of just like in kind of the feel good, but no real work is being put in, then why would they be that motivated to get on the court and go practice for an hour and a half or do, conditioning drills or something like that? And the answer is they really wouldn't be, because they're, one, their nervous system's pretty dysregulated. They feel like everybody else is better than them. And so they're kind of starting from a place of discouragement rather than encouragement. And then two, they don't really feel like they need to do that because they can go do this other thing that's a lot, more painless and a lot less effortful, and still get some kind of reward in their brain. So I know that was long-winded and a couple, there's many different directions, but that would be kind of the start of how I feel like social media is, or how I think social media is impacting, modern athletes.
Yeah. David, I had so many guests on the show talking about the same topic, and then we keep bumping all the time about the word stress. How do you define stress?
So stress to me, I think of as a challenge. So like a stressor is something that is challenging you. And what I mean by that is, in psychology, especially sports psychology, they talk about this guy Lazarus, who kind of talked about, okay, when we're perceiving something, you kind of either classify it as like a threat, or maybe like a challenge. And part of that, perception is like, okay, you're asking yourself unconsciously, do I have what it takes? Do I have what I need to be able to face this? And so, you could be diagnosed with, a chronic medical condition. And that could be a stressor, right? You could get stressed from that because you're seeing that maybe as a threat, and then you're wondering, okay, I don't really have what it takes, or I don't even know much about this. And so it kind of overwhelms you and it stresses you out. Or you could, that's in life, but you could be an athlete and you're going against the opponent and they're playing great and they're outplaying you. And that could, stress you out. Internally, we have these little alarms in our brains and our bodies. And this is what our nervous system is great with doing, is that the alarm starts going off when we perceive that, there's a challenge in front of us or a stressor in front of us. And so the alarms kind of start going off, and then that's when fight or flight mode is activated. And I do want to say, this is a great thing, right? This is how we evolved. This is how we all got here. This is why Homo sapiens are Homo sapiens, and we've made it to 2025, is because we have this system that's helped us to evolve to be in the position that we are in. So that way we don't constantly put ourselves in danger and not learn from it. But we want to be able to detect danger and then overcome it to a certain degree. And so, for me, stress and getting stressed is actually a good thing. The caveat there is that it needs to be intermittent. And so a stress should be an intermittent challenge, which is what games are, right? In sports, like you want to intermittently challenge yourself. If you're training all the time, that's overtraining. You're going to get way too fatigued. You're not giving your brain and your body time to recover and be built up stronger. You're just stressing it out. And now you're going to get a worse response instead of a better. And it's the same thing with our nervous system. If you're in that state of kind of chronic stress, chronic overactivation of the fight or flight, if you're not getting back into connection mode, you're not getting periods of rest and recovery where you're kind of taking your foot off the gas pedal, then you're going to, it's going to lead to shutdown. And so stress is great. We're built for it. We're wired for it, and we need it. However, it needs to be intermittent, and we need to cultivate skills and relationships to be able to, deal with it. So that way it doesn't, overwhelm us all the time.
Yeah. What psychological challenges are most dominant among Gen Z athletes?
That's a great question. Something that I'm seeing, especially in working with athletes one-on-one, typically around like 13, 14, 15 years of age, I'm seeing a lot of what would be referred to as demandingness. So there's this cool theory called rational emotive behavior therapy, REBT. It's under the umbrella of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and Albert Ellis was a psychologist that came up with REBT. And it's essentially looking at, okay, how do your beliefs, impact your behaviors? Because your beliefs, they impact your feelings and they impact your thoughts, and they also impact kind of the outcomes of situations and behaviors as well. So it's really, when I'm working with athletes, I'm trying to get at, hey, how do you talk to yourself? What does that look like in your head? And then another layer would be like, okay, what are you expecting from yourself? What are your self, expectations? What do you really think about yourself? And then even behind that, to get any deeper, is like, what do you believe about yourself? What do you believe about yourself as a player? Do you think you have what it takes? What does that look like when push comes to shove? And so, that's a process. But in that process, I've really seen how modern athletes are struggling with a thing called demandingness. And that demandingness takes the form of language that uses words like, I must, I have to, I need to, I should have. This kind of moral language that even as I say it, I can say it in a tone that maybe reflects the inner voice, where it's like, oh, I should have been better at that, or I have to have a good game this game, or I must figure this out. That kind of must, should, ought to, have to language kind of binds you. It puts this pressure on you, this weight on you. You can kind of almost feel the heaviness or like the sinking as you're using that language and kind of hearing it. But when we use this kind of tone and style of talking to ourselves, of self-beliefs, where it's placing these demands on us, we feel that heaviness and that pressure, and we end up kind of like sinking to a lower level, rather than using language that we're saying words like, I want to, I'd like to, I'd prefer. That, hey, you're still stating your desire and what you want. You're still stating, what you believe. However, you're not putting this unnecessary pressure on yourself, this kind of binding force that really just kind of weighs you down.
And on that, how can parents and coaches better support them in balancing this kind of pressures?
Yeah, I think it's important to really see how we internalize the voices in our environment. By we, I just mean people in general. And so you take a young athlete, it's like, my wife and I have young kids right now, so it's an easy example. One's 2.5. And it's a great age because you really start to see that imaginative play. He's starting to kind of play by himself, and it's really cool. He gets in like his own little world, but he uses the language that we use, right? He uses the sentences and phrases and words that we say around him or to him. And you really see like, oh man, like language, he's really taking our language and adopting it for himself. And then he's kind of talking to himself, right, as he's playing. And you hear the language, and then in 6 months or a year from now, it's going to be more in his head, and he's going to be really internalizing, those voices, his parents' voices. And it's the same as we all grow up. It doesn't stop when you're just 2.5 or 3 years old. Even, up till, late in life, we're doing this. We're internalizing the voices around us. And so I think it's important as a parent, as a coach, to really understand that we play a role in young people's lives, and the voice that we use, not just what we say, but how we say it, the tone. That's going to become one of the voices, or a voice inside of their head. And so if you're a coach or a parent and you're using that language, come on, you got to play better, you have to be better than that, come on, and so when we're doing that, that's what's going to be internalized in them. And also see, it's not nowadays with young athletes, it's not a lack of, we always think they're like unwilling or unmotivated, but it's more like they're kind of unable. They're unable to control their nervous systems because they don't have the skills or kind of the experiences or maturity yet, or the help or support. And so we really need to ask ourselves, like, are we putting more pressure on them? And is that what they need? Is it really is it that they don't have enough pressure on them, or is it the problem that they already have too much pressure on them? And we need to help encourage them and uplift them and give them what they need to be able to, do the things that they want to do and they desire to do. And so for, parents and coaches, I would say we need to check our own language and how we're talking, not just to them, but around them, because those voices will be internalized. And so are those voices demanding and putting more pressure, or are those voices uplifting, encouraging, helpful, and ultimately freeing the athlete?
Yeah. David, you emphasize nervous system regulation as a cornerstone of peak performance. Let's unpack that a bit. Why is nervous system regulation so vital for athletes?
Ultimately, it's the basis of all things we do, all decisions we make, all actions we take, how we move our bodies, how quickly we move our bodies, what we see. Perception is huge. I spend a lot of time, let's just stay with eyes maybe for a second. So the vision of an athlete is hugely important, because our vision impacts our stress level, and our stress level impacts our vision. And I talk about that, how when we get stressed, we get tunnel vision. The literal perception quality starts to become more kind of bordered and start to shrink. And so if you're an athlete, right, and your nervous system and it's controlling you and you're not controlling it, and you kind of start to get really stressed out, then you're literally not seeing opportunities on the field or court that are there. Your perception is not as good as it could be. And so this is, a very literal biological reality that is happening to athletes, is that when they're getting more stressed, their vision isn't as good as when they're regulated, more in control of their nervous system. And that's not even taking into account, we're more stressed and maybe we get in our heads, and now we're, thinking in our heads, and we're kind of going back and forth on that mistake that we made, and we're not being present to what's actually happening in front of us in the game. And so, I think as far as nervous system regulation in athletes, to unpack that a little bit would be, how is their vision? Because vision is such a crucial part of how we play games. We're such visual creatures. So much of our brain is dedicated to making sense of visual sensory information. And so to be able to use vision as a way for athletes to really regulate their nervous systems and, get their heads in the game, so to speak, I think is, a great tool in a way that we can, help them enjoy it more and have fun because they're more in touch with it.
Yeah, yeah. And how does your method, the B.E.T method, help athletes regain balance during high stress moments?
Yeah, so I think, I talked about breathing. That's just a simple one because it's something we do, 20,000 times a day that we don't really think about. But if you can, especially, so great question, pressure situations. In pressure situations, things feel uncertain. Things feel out of our control. So what is one thing, when everything else maybe feels out of our control or like it's kind of slipping away and we don't really know what's going to happen, what is one thing that we can come back to and that we can control? Our breath. We can control our breath, and it starts from there. If you can control your breath, then you can kind of start to control other things, and you start to kind of build what's, Albert Bandura called self-efficacy, right? Your ability, your kind of confidence, your trust, and your belief that you can take action and make an impact in your circumstances. And so when you're in pressure situations, that's just something simple to always fall back on, of like, hey, if I can be with myself and control my breath right now, then I can extend my control out from there. So, following that along the line, okay, breath and then eyes. We'll go back to maybe the volleyball example, or let's use a different sport. Let's talk about soccer and penalty kicks. So say you made it all the way to the end of the game, 90 minutes, you played your extra time, now we're going into penalty kicks. 3-4 in penalty kicks, you make the next one, your team solidifies the victory. So you're walking up, right, that long walk from midfield to the penalty kick spot, controlling your breathing during that walk. In that moment, right, regardless of the crowd, regardless of your teammates, the situation, to be able to be with yourself, to be able to control your breathing, right, that's going to help you control the placement of that kick better. So I'm going to regulate my nervous system so that I'm more composed. So I'm going to focus on extending my exhale longer than my inhale, and I'm going to have a nice rhythm in my breathing as I'm walking up. And I might even do, one more exhale before I take the kick. And then, breath, eyes, touch. So then eyes. So then, where am I looking with my eyes? Maybe I'm looking at the ball, concentrating on, the part that I really want to make contact. And am I looking at the, the spot of the net, or am I kind of, trying to tip off the goalie in the wrong direction and kind of give him eyes in another direction? So focusing on my vision, and then, touch as well. Really making sure that, hey, that contact, my foot to that ball, or maybe before I start to really make that forward motion, I'm feeling, the kind of that grasp beneath my cleats and kind of that impact and being kind of taking in the moment. So to be able to kind of settle my nervous system, so I'm not thinking in my head, oh, what am I going to do? Is he going to stop it? But to be able to be with yourself, control your breathing, to be able to direct your vision, your eyes, and then to be able to kind of, settle down your emotions by being mindful of your touch. These are 3 simple things you can do in a high pressure situation to be able to give yourself a greater chance of success.
Yeah, yeah. Let's shift the gear to another topic, which is youth development through sport. Sports are seen as a metaphor for life. I know you believe that, David, in using sports as a vehicle for a broader development. How do you prioritize personal growth alongside athletic performance?
I always try and make the connections. I mean, first and foremost, when I'm, coaching, helping somebody, whether that's more on the mental side or I'm, literally on the court or field with them, I always make sure to ask about, life in a broader context, whether, whatever they're interested in, movies they've seen recently. If they like that sport, maybe they watch professional teams in that sport or have favorite players, but and talk about that, but and then check up on, how they're doing in school and whatnot. But I think a great example of that is, okay, say I'm having a, session. This has happened quite a few times. And we're talking about just what we just talked about, being able to control our nervous system so that we don't feel as nervous, so that way we don't feel as maybe anxious, or that we feel a little bit more composed going into a pressure situation. Okay, well, school, it's important for the youth, and so a lot of them get, test anxiety, pre-test anxiety, where they're getting really anxious no matter how much they've studied or prepared. So even applying some of those principles and strategies that we talk about in sports, and showing them like, hey, this isn't just something for here, this is something for other parts of your life, to be able to use these skills. And that's actually the whole point of you getting better at sports, not just on the court or field, but growing in your confidence, is so that, in other areas of your life you can extend those skills and have that confidence as well. So, that's something too, keeping in mind of like making sure I'm asking about their life, taking a personal interest in their life, because that's why I'm doing this in the first place to begin with. But and then also making sure that I'm creating those connections in conversation when we're training or when we're talking, to be able to show them like, hey, this isn't just something for sports, but this has a kind of broader context to it. This makes an impact in your friendships and how you deal with stuff going on with your friends, or stuff going on at school or a test, or how to make decisions, going off to college, whatever life things are happening around you, how can what you learn in the sports world kind of impact that as well. I mean, and part of that is the relationship, so making sure that, I'm there for them if, they want to talk about anything else as well, being available to, their needs as well.
Yeah. You've spoken, David, about reframing failure as a stepping stone, and I believe that's a powerful mindset shift. How do you help athletes overcome fear of failure?
I always start with how they're thinking about it. So how do they see it? We talked about psychologically what we're really seeing in young athletes. I mentioned the demandingness and I must or I should, and kind of to go along with that, there's so much attachment of a young person's identity to the outcomes. And I wish it wasn't that way. I get it. I've gone through that myself, and I still have, attachments. But nowadays there's so much attachments to outcomes. It's like who they are is dependent upon what they do, instead of the other way around. And so, I see that kind of identity attachment, their athletic, identity, just meaning so much that if they have a negative outcome in sports, they equate that to that they are bad, not just as a player, but, as a person. And so I think in general, that's kind of my entry point a lot of times. And I think that goes with your last question of, putting this sports thing in the context of a broader development. Like if I can help them detach from sports a little bit in a healthy sense, so that way they see it as just something they do and not completely who they are, then that's fantastic. And, to kind of couple that with your question you just asked as far as failure is, understanding kind of their role, understanding where they are in kind of their identity formation process, and, how they're viewing their athletic identity, the level of attachment there, but then also how do they think of failure? 99% of the time they think failure is bad, and being able to reframe that in a sense of, I love Ellen Langer, her definition of failure as incomplete success. I love that definition because it's like, hey, this is actually necessary. This is part of the process. And then being able to, like I said earlier, like we're wired to socially compare. Okay, so you're a great volleyball player. You want to put the ball away. Say you're an outside hitter. So you're getting set. You want to be able to convert that into a kill and get a point for your team. Okay, well, the best hitting percentage, I think in NCAA, D1 women's volleyball this past season was like under 500. So incredible percentage, maybe like, 0.460, 0 would be an example. That means the other half of the time they're not getting a kill. And so just being able to frame that, because there's so much unrealistic expectations, to come back to the social media stuff, right? Everything's edited, everything's filtered. And so, if they don't get the outcome they want, if they don't get this perfect outcome, they think everything was, a waste. that everything is just kind of thrown away and it's all bad. And that black and white thinking is so toxic, it's so damaging, because they're not seeing the context, they're not seeing the process, they're only seeing some result, and they don't really have the understanding to unpack that result and what it actually means. And so putting it in a context of like, hey, even the best players in the country who are so good are still not converting or capitalizing more than half of the time. So why do you have this unrealistic expectation for yourself that you should or ought to or must get a kill every time? Like, it's not going to happen. You're expecting perfection, and perfection isn't real, and it's overrated. So being able to put it in context, like, okay, well then if that's unrealistic, what is realistic, and what do I actually want, and what should I, what standards should I hold myself to? So again, long-winded answer, but being able to unpack, failure as not just this bad thing, but this necessary thing. And actually, failure isn't what you thought of, because you have such unrealistic expectations. When we start to unwind those and kind of recalibrate those, then we can start to understand failure as part of the process, and I'm more accepting of it because I see that now, rather than just this bad thing that means I'm bad.
Yeah. David, I asked you earlier about how do you define stress? And this is based on my interaction with other guests. And I have another question, basically, which keep coming all the time. It's a word that it's overused, which is pressure. And I get as well conflicting definition about, seriously, what do we mean by pressure? How do you define pressure, David?
Yeah. So to kind of revisit stress, because maybe I didn't give a literal definition to it, but I think of that kind of, through the nervous system lens of when you get stressed, there's a psychophysiological reality there, right, kind of your mind, your kind of thoughts and your feelings, your behaviors, but also your physiology. There's this brain and body component to stress. And so I think of the activation of that fight or flight mode, the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system specifically, of like, oh, when that's activated, that's when we're stressed. We kind of get that cortisol, from our adrenal glands are kind of dumping into us. We get the norepinephrine in our brain. We're getting kind of stressed and flustered. I think that is kind of that stress response. A stressor is something that challenges us, and it elicits this kind of stress response, whether we see that as a challenge or a threat. And so there's this psychophysiological reality. I see the same as pressure. And it's all relative, right? Stress is relative, pressure is relative. You put me in a situation on a basketball court, I might get stressed. You put LeBron James, there's no stress at all, right? I might feel a lot of pressure, he may not feel any pressure. And so it's different for each person. That's an extreme example, but there's, a big spectrum there when it comes to athletes and sports and who feels, pressure. So psychophysiological reality. And so there might be a psychological component to an athlete. They may feel pressure, when they go to play this game. And maybe it's just like a regular game in a tournament. It doesn't really mean much, but to them it means everything. Maybe their parents there. Maybe their dad, drives trucks and he doesn't get to come to a lot of games, and he's there at this game. And so, his daughter really wants to make him proud and really show that she's been working hard, and so she's putting this kind of added pressure. Nobody else on the team is feeling that pressure the way she's feeling it, and so there's a psychological component, but that's also impacting not just her brain but her body, the physiological component. And so now her muscles probably going to get a little bit more tense. Maybe her shoulders are raised. She's going to have more kind of tension in the back of her neck. She's going to be breathing kind of more through maybe her mouth and upper chest rather than kind of through her belly in a relaxed position. Maybe she's going to be more distracted. Her eyes are going to be darting to the stands, wondering, what face my dad made? Did he see that? Or, oh my gosh, I hope he didn't see that play. And kind of looking around rather than being present to what's going on the court. So I use that as an example of pressure is just like stress is a psychophysiological reality, where pressure is a situation where something matters to you, something means something to you, a moment in sports or, a game that you play. But it's something where it has a heavier weight to it of meaning than just maybe a normal moment or a normal game.
Yeah. Coaches are not just instructors, they are mentors and role models. Your book offers practical advice for them. What's the most critical piece of advice for today's coaches, David?
I would say I've been using this phrase, connection before correction, because a lot of times as coaches, we think we are programming robots. And so we think it's like an informational, or technical issue, and we're just like pumping in algorithms to robots. rather than seeing our players as humans with, thoughts and emotions, and they're in this mood because this happened at school, and their girlfriend just broke up with them, and they're not paying attention in practice. And so being able to see players as humans and not robots is huge. And so I use the phrase connection before correction because, well, the first one is, as coaches, we like to jump in when things are going wrong, and I think we need to jump in when things are going right. So being aware of our own negativity bias and being aware that, hey, like, let's have a lens where we're seeing things that are going well, the little things, the big things, everything in between. So that way you reinforce that and it multiplies and occurs at a higher rate. So that's the first one, jumping in when things are going well and affirming, providing positive feedback and not always negative feedback. And we could talk more about that one if you want, because that's a really interesting tactic. And then the second one is connection before correction. So if a player makes a mistake, and they feel some pressure on themselves, probably internal pressure they're putting on themselves because of that demandingness that we spoke about, and so they have this pressure, and that's probably leading them to become dysregulated. So their nervous system is dysregulated. Maybe they made a couple mistakes in a row. If you try to coach them and offer feedback and give them information while they're dysregulated, it most likely will not work. In fact, it'll be like magnets that are, repelling each other. As you get closer, it pushes them further away. And I think coaches, we experience this all the time. It's like, oh, why aren't they getting them? I'm giving them everything. Like they should be, they can't make the adjustments. They're not being coachable. But really, a lot of times it's on us. Of like, okay, well then connection before correction. I need to help them regulate their nervous system. I need to be providing some cues, whether it's my facial expressions or tone of voice, give them some reassurance, making sure that they are able to regulate their nervous system, so that way now they're in connection mode and they're not just trying to survive, but they're open to feedback, they're open to getting better and to growth. And so once they're kind of back in that connection mode, then I can offer that corrective feedback and they're actually open to it and able to absorb it and do something with it, rather than kind of fighting an uphill battle when they're not even open and receptive to me coaching in the first place. So that's why I say connection before correction, because if we're just trying to jump in when things are negative, it's kind of a recipe for disaster, because that's typically when we're least open, is when we do something wrong and we already feel bad about it.
Yeah. David, I've been eager to ask you this following question based on your experience, but quite often we've noticed that youngsters, they champion, they like, they respect a coach, could be at the club, a team, a sport, but they don't show the same respect, they don't champion the PE instructors at their school. What is it?
Man, that's a great question. I'll maybe, before kind of going more into it, I'll say this
from your experience, David,
because I think, well, so I'll kind of say, let me offer like a cultural commentary, and maybe we can zoom in, but I know I can speak specifically in the States, just the erosion of physical education in the States, right? Like that is happening, and that is not good. We are playing less and less. Kids are getting less and less time, to play and get their energy out, and they're getting less and less physical education. It's not part of curriculums because we're prioritizing all this testing that apparently second graders need to be able to, pass these tests. And so we're just like playing this weird social game, this weird social status game, where we're prioritizing these grades or benchmarks, and we're just trying to make ourselves feel important, rather than, hey, what's really important for human development right now is that they play, specifically outside, and physical education is huge. So, to your question, I think that's a big part of it in the States, is that we don't take physical education seriously. And then what does that lead to? It leads us to not take physical education teachers seriously. And so that's kind of just like this, to put it brutally, the perception a lot of times is that it's just kind of like a joke, class. You just have to take it, or, it's an elective, a waste of time, rather than, oh, this is like a huge, this is so important for my brain and my body and, how I'm feeling right now, but also my future. And also as an athlete, it's extra important. And so seeing not just the usefulness, but the value in it. And so, I think it's in this broader context of physical education, just eroding in our culture, and then also it's not taken seriously, so those teachers aren't taken seriously. But to attach a side note to that is, a lot of what I do with like the physical performance, so helping athletes become, better athletes. And look, there's great athletes, there's obviously great sports performers in our world. Humans can do amazing things, but in general, kids are not moving like they used to move because they're not getting outside and playing like they used to play. Like the number of, just outdoor playtime or unstructured playtime is so down compared to 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's insane. And so we're seeing that, be a coach and you're like, okay, and if you know much about athletic movement, you can see it right off the bat of like, man, they can't hip hinge, they can't, step ladder, they can't do basic human movement things. Maybe they can do these sport specific things because they've done it enough and trained their bodies, but just basic play movements, change of directions, like, basic ball games of like, anticipating and picking up on cues. A lot of that stuff that you just innately or implicitly learn as kids just from playing outside, playing games, playing tag, playing hide and go seek, capture the flag, all these games that we've played for generations. Kids just don't have that. So now we have to like train it in a formal sense, and it's just kind of weird because it's something that you should just learn growing up implicitly. And so all that to say, like in my mind, a lot of people, they think it's, kind of the word I guess would be like sexy, right? The sexy thing is to go to this trainer. The sexy thing is to be able to go to this, sports trainer that's going to make you so athletic or help you jump high. 95%, if not 100% of people that I see or that I've seen other people work with, I'm like, they just need to go to a PE class. They just need to go to an elementary school PE class. That would help them so much. They don't need to be doing these specific things. Like, that's great too, but like, just go to a PE class and play games and do some push-ups and do some lunges. Like that, like start simple. That stuff helps you, but everybody wants to do the secret thing, do this thing for 10 reps and you'll change your life. It's like, no, just go to a PE class and you'll be a better athlete, a better person. So yeah, I don't, those are just some thoughts. I don't have all the answers to that question, but it is something I'm passionate about.
In your opinion, is it more to do with the culture? Because you're talking about, we don't see youngsters, we don't see kids playing outside for various reasons. The first one, kids now, they are more cocooned by the parents for their safety, and sometimes is way too much. Playing outside with the neighbor kids, which we used to do, and then you come back home dirty, sometimes scratches, bruises, normal. In today's reality, it's quite different from a parenting point of view. And I'm not putting a blame towards the parents, absolutely not, but the shift into the culture. And then you talked about it earlier, David, about the social media, about using the device, about social media and sleeping, which we did not talk about, but spending more time staring at screen, iPads, tablets, or cell phone. So yeah.
Yeah, it is, man. I'd love to jump in just for a minute if that's all right with you. Jonathan Haidt is a big social psychologist that I think everybody should read. The Anxious Generation, his most recent book, and his big thing is we've protected kids from the physical world, but we've underprotected them from the digital world, and that's really starting kind of 80s and 90s, and stranger danger and all these things, especially the U.S. and our culture, where it's just like
it's
now
everywhere,
we have access
David,
to so much media.
Sorry to jump in. It's everywhere. It's not only in the U.S.
Please.
I see it here in Europe. Although the physical activity or PE in schools, I must say it's quite important here compared to the U.S. Maybe because of the investment the government they put into public and private schools, and it's mandatory. So there is no escape unless you have precondition medical issue. So right, carry on.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm glad that that's the case somewhere. And so Jonathan Haidt's big point is that we've overprotected them, and this is kind of speaks to the parental aspect of like, well, I don't want them to go outside or walk the dog down the street or this or that, because you watch the news and you feel like there's killers on the loose outside your house, and you may be in a perfectly safe neighborhood, but it's kind of, again, that negativity bias that a lot of media feeds on. It kind of polarizes us and dysregulates our nervous system, so now we're making these decisions based in fear and anxiety rather than rationally thinking about things. And so that's the parental aspect. And then the child aspect of like, okay, so it's easy to hand them this, device. And again, social media, adolescents, in America are using it 4 to 6 hours on average, just social media platforms. It's really 7, 8, 9 hours plus of screen time per day. And so Jonathan Haidt again makes this point of it's not just that, because that has a negative effect as is, and that's been shown, but it's really about the opportunity cost. Because what have kids been doing, 20 years ago and way before then, if they didn't have those screens, those 6, 7, 8 hours on screens per day, what were they doing? They were having real conversations, right? They were actually asking each other, out on dates, or being able to, do things in person without this crippling anxiety. Being able to play outside and get sunshine, and it's wild. We have all the research, not all of it, but we have a ton of research now that just sheds light on all the wisdom that humans have known for thousands of years, of even just spending time outside and the goodness of, sunshine and time outdoors, and what that does to our brains and our bodies and regulates us. And so it's just, we know these things, but it's a cultural issue. It's a societal issue where, we're kind of stuck and trapped in, our own, one, anxieties, and then two, just kind of comfort. And so, yeah, it's unfortunate, but I'm hoping that with things like Jonathan Haidt's Anxious Generation and different organizations, different community-based movements, that, people can start to make decisions, that are best for their family, and also looking at, the science backing it up.
Yeah. Mental health is becoming more central to the conversation in sports, but there is still work to do. Why do you think, David, mental health is still under-addressed in sports?
Yeah, I think part of that is because we still see that as so separate. And I love that mental health has gotten so much light, especially the past, and attention, the past, I would say 10-ish years. At the same time, some of that can almost make it its own thing. We don't see it as integrated within people and the systems that we're a part of, but we kind of have this mental health is just this thing over there, and we talk about it sometimes, and we have conferences and whatnot. But I think especially as coaches, we need to be able to see that in the view, connected with sports, because if your athletes are human beings and they have minds, then mental health is important for you coaching. How is their mental health? And that doesn't mean do they have a clinical disorder or not? That's part of it. But also mental health, is their mental space, is their mindset, is their headspace healthy? And how can you as a coach help them develop or foster a healthier, mindset? And so for coaches, I think we need to see it less maybe as this separated kind of entity, or thing, that people are telling us we need to care about, and rather is connected to our athletes. Hey, you're helping on the technical side, you're helping them be better, cricket players or rowers or golfers, but what is this doing for their mindset? What is this doing for how they think about themselves, how they view the world, how they, think about other people, how they enter into relationships, things like that. So again, I don't think we need to see it as something that's divorced from what we do, but it's very much a part of it. And so, including it in your coaching as simply as, hey, what's their mindset today? What's their attitude like, their mood? Considering these things, now you're starting to see them as a player in this broader context of them as a person.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, David. Just for the listeners, every coach wants their athlete, their team to be at the peak for a game or a tournament. And when you say at the peak, basically to perform better. David, have you treated or been in touch with athletes or coaches dealing with burnout?
Yes, I have. Coming back to what we've kind of mentioned so far on this podcast of if we're in action mode for too long, so if our stress system, fight or flight, is activated for too long, we end up in shutdown. And I think shutdown encapsulates burnout perfectly. It's where you run out of gas. It's where you kind of finally hit that point where it's okay, I'm done. You're just kind of discouraged, maybe learned helplessness is a part of that experiences where you just feel hey, I'm fighting an uphill battle. I can't, as a coach, I see that a lot of times, coaches that are putting their everything, but they can't really seem to help their athletes, whether that's more on the successful side and their kind of records and wins and losses, or just kind of getting through to their athletes and making a difference in their lives. Burnout can happen there, or burnout can happen as players. You have that demandingness and you're putting this extra pressure on yourself, or you feel extra pressure from outside sources, parents, coaches, culture. And, I see a lot of burnout, especially, funny enough, I see it typically, and this isn't just in sports, I think it happens in sports, but that is an expression of a deeper burnout that's happening more on a personal level. specifically around like junior year of high school. So maybe when an athlete is like 17 years old or like right before then, somewhere around that age, I see it kind of happening to where they're kind of tired of playing the game. And what I mean by playing the game, I mean this social game that they, we all play as humans, but especially adolescents now with, social media, it creates a heightened or like a more intense social game where you always have to be on. You always have to be performing. You always have to look your best. You can't make any mistakes. You can't embarrass yourself because people are always videoing. People are always watching. And if you fall behind or you kind of fall in the pecking order, then that is like just the ultimate negative thing. And so I see it a lot of times, in athletes where they're just kind of tired of it. And maybe it's about the sport, but a lot of times it's more on a personal level. They're just tired of performing. Sports, like, they perform, but they feel like their whole life's a performance where they're just trying to please their parents and make them happy and get into a good college, or trying to make their coaches happy, trying to just, put on a brave face and make people like them at school so they have friends, but they don't really like their friends and who they are, but they don't really have any other options. And so it's like I see teenagers all over playing this social game where they're just trying to perform and kind of look a certain way, but on the inside they feel totally different and they feel kind of alone. And I think that if they do that for too long, they get burnt out. And that shows itself in sports as well.
Yeah. Is it easy to mitigate burnout within athletes or coaches? Or let's say, what are the signs before a athlete or a coach reach the hitting the wall, like we say?
Yeah. I would say with athletes, I always try and use the barometer of like enjoying the sport. Like I want my athletes I work with to be successful. I want them to experience a difference in how they play. But I always try and come back, and this is more probably for me than for them, but I always come back to the point of like, ultimately I'm helping them if they're enjoying, the sport more. I don't want to put more pressure on them, but hopefully take some pressure off and help them just enjoy it more. And so for them, I think the signs are, how much are they practicing? How much are they getting out and playing their sport unprompted, without a parent nagging them, without a coach telling them? Like, how much are they playing? Because just like children, we need to, and this goes all the way up through childhood. As humans, we need to have unstructured playtime. Like, everything is so structured nowadays. Okay, you have, this piano lesson, or, oh, you're taking the standardized test. Let me set you up with a tutor. You're going to school where they tell you what to do for 7 hours and you sit a lot. It's like we're just placing these demands on these children who become adolescents, who, hopefully will become adults at some point if we let them. And we're just placing these demands and telling them what to do and putting all this structure on them. But how much time do they have to really unstructured time to explore and play and discover who they are and what they like? And I think that's the beauty of sports, is that, take a game like soccer or football. Like, you can create so much when you're playing that game. And so many people can create different possibilities. There's not just one way to play. There's not one style of player. There's so many different ways. And so I can go out right now in the grass with a soccer ball, find out different ways to dribble and move my body and fake a pass and chip the ball and hit it on the ground. Like, you can create. And so, I think of, I'm kind of rambling, but like, growing up, that was a big part for me in basketball and soccer. Like, I love to go play by myself, but in my mind I was playing with a bunch of other people. Like, I would use my imagination and just play, right?
Normal, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's
Don't
fine, that's fine.
It's
if
totally
that,
normal.
Yeah, that's fine if that's fine if that makes me crazy, man. It was fun, but it just like is, using your imagination to do that. But we're wired for that, and I think that
it's
nowadays we need to see that.
It's funny you saying that, because even at elite level, let's say winter sports, let's say downhill, prior the start, or when you leave the gate at the top, you take maybe 30 seconds, 1 minute maximum, sort of to visualize the course, the gate, the turn, a turn, what speed you're gonna, and it's all playing inside your head. It's a fascinating time prior the green light, or prior the game, because even some team sports, they do the same. Maybe not every single athlete or player, but I see some players, it's like for a couple of minutes they are in their world. Either they have headset, we think they're listening to music or whatever, is just to try to visualize, and through that maybe it boosts some kind of motivation. Maybe it
Yeah.
lift little bit some kind of adrenaline level getting up,
Yeah.
and it's I find it really fascinating.
Man, I love that. And because I talk about in the book too, kind of the different instincts we have. We have a play instinct and then we have a
Hmm.
survival instinct. And when we're playing sports, we need to be activating that play instinct where that's full of possibilities. How am I going to create opportunities to score or to, do as well as I can, rather than survival of like, well, I don't want to mess up or I don't want to make a mistake. And our brains, they're prediction machines. They're trying to predict what's going to happen and use the imagination. Like, we're the only creatures that can really do this on Earth and have been able to, of like, really use your imagination. And we can use that in a way that elicits a survival instinct, where we use those what if statements. What if this happens? Or what if they, block my shot? Or, what if I make a mistake? What if coach pulls me out? And you get really anxious and, or, like you said, there's 30 seconds before you're visualizing the course. It's like, man, what if I stay really low on that turn and really shift my weight? And oh man, what if I have the best time I've had so far? What if I have my personal record? You're kind of saying the same kind of what if, but you're using it in a positive way, using that imagination to try and discover what you're capable of rather than, avoid a bad outcome. And so I think that, the imagination is so powerful, positive or negative, but being able to use that, visualization, imagery, spending time and just playing to where you're activating that play instinct rather than the survival instincts. And then you're going to have fun. Then it's going to be less burnout because it's just a joy to play a sport and see what you're capable of and push your boundaries rather than you're just trying to survive and perform for other people.
Yeah, yeah. Let's end with some practical advice and talk about parents. What's the most common mistake, David, parents make when supporting their child's athletic career?
Man, I never want to come across as like you mentioned earlier, kind of blaming parents. I think just like coaches, because you're kind of the coach for your kid, in a sense. I think parents, they jump in too quickly. And now, I have really young kids, so I don't feel this full on, but I know I will probably pretty sooner rather than later. That instinct to jump in and help, that instinct to do something for them or not let them, quote unquote fail, or do something wrong or be seen as bad by other people. And so I think that instinct to jump in too quickly, because there's a distinction between learning and performance, and I think people really need to know that. They really need to understand that. And so, you can be a coach or a parent and you're helping your athlete with, they're practicing some skill and, they could get better at it right then and there. That's their performance. Their performance is like, oh man, they've gotten better. But maybe they didn't really learn it, right? It's like studying for a test, but you're just kind of memorizing the answers rather than understanding it and learning it. You go to the test and it's like, oh, I did well. And then you get another test, a couple weeks later on the same material and you bomb it. And it's like, okay, well, you just it was good performance, but that shows you that it doesn't transfer, that there really wasn't this deeper learning going on. And so in order for that deeper learning to go on, we need to be able to make mistakes. We need to be able to, fail, incomplete success. We need to be able to fail and, kind of come back to ourselves and be like, oh, what happened? What adjustments do I need to make? Okay, let's try this, right? And just kind of play with it and explore it and just kind of experiment. And I think that's when real learning and real fun and joy take place. So with parents, it's just being able to control, being able to regulate our own instinct to jump in too quickly and be, hey, they're okay, they're safe, they're secure. This is actually long term. This is great for their development. It's okay right now if they're 12 years old and, they make some mistakes and, they're kind of having a tough evening because they didn't have the best game. You don't want them to be a 22-year-old who, is, having that unstable sense of themselves or identity, right? But it's okay when they're kind of 12 and kind of going through that. And so anyway, I just, bring that up to say I think that instinct is in all of us to just help our kids, but, we should question that. Okay, what does help really mean? Just help them in the moment so they feel better or they're comfortable, or help them more long term so they're actually learning and growing and can mature and to be their own people where they stand on their own feet and don't really need us to, step in for them.
Yeah. What's one piece of advice you'd give to young athletes feeling overwhelmed by pressure?
That's a good question. Man, I probably would even just like try and talk about something other than that. Like, I know that kind of sounds weird, like I'm avoiding the question, but I think about like a young athlete who maybe is struggling with pressure or whatnot, but even just like talking about, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or like, what do you want to do? You know what I mean? Like, oh, what hobby, what movies do you like? Or just being able to, I think for me, I think about myself, and when I was younger, I, loved basketball, put so much pressure on myself. It was all I thought about and everything. And it became kind of this like obsession. And so for me, I would just try and talk to myself about something other than basketball, because we can put pressure on ourselves. Like I mentioned, pressure really means something to you. It matters to you. Being able to put that in a bigger context. Okay, basketball matters to me, but basketball isn't everything. Me playing basketball and how I do isn't everything. So, seeing it as just a part of something bigger rather than that something bigger itself. And so, being able to place it in a bigger context. So young athletes struggling with pressure, I'll just try and talk to them about something else, in their lives that matters to them. That's, not that thing.
And in your opinion, David, who feel more pressure within the youngsters, girls or boys?
Oh man, that's a tough question. I think it manifests so differently, but I, my initial gut instinct, and partly because I'm working with a lot of girls
Mhm.
right now on the mental side, I would say girls. My kind of thing I tell parents is like, I think the toughest job right now is to be a teenage girl. I think the second toughest job is to be a parent of a teenage girl, especially with social media. And, we don't need to fully go into this, and
Yeah.
apologies if it makes anyone uncomfortable, but our American culture struggles with so much objectification, right? We objectify, and there's so much sexualization of everything that it's like, with TikTok especially, to kind of bring it
Mhm.
back to that point, and social media and appearances to get people's attention and all of that. It's like everything's a performance, and I think that comes at a cost of females and their mental health. Even the 2019 kind of reports of Instagram that got released, right, and leaked out, of just showing how they were aware of all the female adolescents that were struggling with eating disorders, right, and all that kind of social comparison, and trying to, look a certain way to be attractive to people, to really mean something to somebody. All these innate, evolutionarily, psychological parts of us are just being taken advantage of by a lot of, social media companies, and I think females get the
Yeah.
worst part of that. So I would say them.
Yeah. Yeah. How can families work together to create balance and resilience?
I think having, again, times of play and social connection. So being able, again, we're having the research and the science support things that we've known for millennia. And so being able to just have time outside, right, when you can. I know things are seasonal, but having times outside, having times, as a family where kids are just playing, you're playing, parents are involved. So really play, get outdoors, and fostering skills of, nervous system regulation. Spending time outside and playing kind of does that for
Mm.
you naturally, but and then having these skills, whether it's, learning a little bit about breathing, or, sensory, modalities, like even just like, being able to kind of integrate your touch and to help you, regulate your nervous system, or being able to say connection before correction for coaches, but it directly applies to parents as well. We want to jump in and discipline when, a kid does something wrong, but giving them some time to, regulate themselves, or just take some space. It's like they probably know what they did wrong. We just need to give them a little bit of space, and then we can talk about it later when we're both less
Mhm.
emotionally charged. And so get outside, play, and then have some, tools to be able to, regulate your nervous system as well.
Great. David, now it's time for our lightning round. You ready for a
All
speedy
right.
Q&A?
Oh, yeah, I'm ready.
Excellent. What's the best book you've read recently?
Oh man. Recently, I was kind of revisiting Wired to Create by Scott Barry
Mhm.
Kaufman, amazing psychologist, and just talking about, I think it was maybe like 2012, 2015 it came out, but just an amazing book on creativity, and just really unpacks a lot of the psychology of what we talked about, imagination. There's 30 seconds of kind of visualizing the race, like talks a lot about kind of the mind there, which is amazing. It brings enough science and research where you're like, man, it's amazing that we know this stuff, but it also leaves, total room for mystery, because the mind is such a mystery. So, that book is awesome.
Okay, morning routine or night owl?
Morning routine for sure. Yeah, I'm up early. The earlier the better. And yeah, I like to go to sleep early as well.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Good. What's your favorite athlete of all time?
Man, I would say Pete Maravich, Pistol Pete. He was a basketball player. He played at LSU. His dad was a coach there, Press Maravich, and then he played New Orleans Jazz was the NBA team. Then they played for, and then Atlanta Hawks. But just an amazing player that was kind of there hadn't really been anything like it. His skill and creativity on the court, just the ways that he could make a pass without even looking to somebody. He just had such a feel for the game. Pretty
And
amazing.
he was known for a three-pointer, no?
Yeah, so they didn't have a 3-point line when he played, and he shot, so far back that, in college he averaged 44, points per
Yeah.
game. And they kind of went back and look at the shot chart, and they're like, man, if there's a 3-point line, he would have averaged over 60 points per game, which is insane. But he just, he could do things that no one else has really been able to do and had a unique style. So he's
And
such a great
apparently he was
athlete.
holding the record until last year that was beaten by Caitlin Clark. Do you know that?
Oh, yeah, that's right. That is correct, yeah.
By a woman.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah, I know. It is crazy. And he, obviously, yeah, complete respect to her. Back then, they had to sit out their freshman year. Like, they had a freshman team, so that wasn't included in the NCAA stats. So what he did in, 3 years with less games per season by like 5 or 10 games than now. So, wildly impressive. And then now to be like, okay, fast forward decades, right? We have Caitlin Clark that's, breaking that record. It's insane. But yeah, I think he's, one of the best athletes, ever. So
I will pick Caitlin Clark. She's fantastic.
she's a magician.
awesome.
Yeah,
And it's
she's good.
not only in basketball, in golf as well. So,
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
hear. She's
yeah.
a great athlete.
David, if you could have a dinner with a historical figure, who will it be and why?
Oh man, that probably showing my religious beliefs here, but I'd say Jesus for many reasons. But regardless of people's religious beliefs, for one man to live on Earth for about 33 years and have the impact that he had, he must have just had so much kind of gravity to him. There must have been something so special. So I think sharing a meal with him, could be pretty incredible. So that'll be my
What would
answer.
you be asking him?
Man, that's a great follow up. Wasn't expecting that one. I would ask him like why he did what he did, like why he came to Earth. So if he is the Son of God, why would God Himself, who became the second person of the Trinity, Jesus, why would He come to Earth? We kind of know that intellectually, but just to hear Him say it, like why is he here? Why did He do what He did? Because if He is God, then He didn't have to do it that way. So why did He do it that way? Would be my question.
Yeah, great. Best advice you've ever received?
Good one. So we've been talking about sports coaching. I had this coach and kind of basketball trainer growing up. Played at a really high level in college. Was a great point guard, super intellectual, amazing man. I was a really anxious kid. I was always trying to be the best, make sure I was doing everything. And so when I would train with him, I'd ask every question like, "Oh, am I doing this right? Or am I doing that right?" And he was a great resource, full of knowledge. But the best, I can literally picture it in my mind. I can picture him just being really calm, really present, and just being like, "You're good. Hey, David, you're good." And that stayed with me. And he was such a model, of kind of peace amidst kind of my own anxieties that I kind of take with me, and I try and embody that for other athletes now as I'm coaching and helping them. Where it's not, like I said earlier, it's not always about information and answers, but just having a presence of somebody with you on the journey, and them being so calm and stable, and just let hey, you're good. You don't have to worry and put extra pressure on yourself. You're good. And so that maybe isn't advice, but more just an experience. But that's always stuck with me, and that's the impact I want to make on other people too.
Which leader, past or present, do you admire the most?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Leader. I I'm gonna stick with religious themes since my mind's on it. Mother Teresa,
Hmm.
right? Saint Mother Teresa of Calcutta. You know, there's so many TED talks now, right, and books of, you know, think of like I think it's Simon Sinek's book, right? Leaders eat last, but that idea of servant leadership, like really giving your life to something bigger than yourself, you know, seeing some problem that humans are facing and dedicating your entire life to just being in the trenches of that. That's a woman that did that and was in the slums of Calcutta, just serving the poor of the poor, and nobody would want that job. And she didn't have to do it, but she voluntarily did that. And I think of, you know, vocation. It comes from this word vocare, right? Vocare meaning like
Hmm.
calling. And I think about that too. And like sports has been a way for me to get in touch with my own calling, which now I feel like my calling, besides a husband, a parent, a father of, but also a coach. And so I think just that idea, right? She was a leader that really followed her calling, where she felt called to serve. And I try and do that as well, even if it's in a place where something I don't necessarily want to do or feel like doing. I think that a calling is bigger than your feelings or my feelings, but something you really just feel pulled into. And so I think, she was an extreme example of that. And it's a good reminder for me to kind of think about her as a leader.
Hmm. Favorite childhood sports memory?
Man, I had this, and I don't want to come off as like egotistical because I'm just kind of laughing about it because looking back, it's like not a serious thing at all, but it felt so big in the moment. When I was a freshman in high school, I played for this little, ninth grade freshman basketball team. And we had played, kind of the town rivals earlier in the season. And I tanked.
Hmm.
Like I put so much pressure on myself. They had this really good, guard who was really athletic, and he just kind of harassed me all game, and I couldn't really do much. And I felt so bad after, like I was a horrible player. Fast forward, a couple months, and we're in this tournament, and we make it to the championship of the tournament, and we're playing that same team. And Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talks about flow, right, and kind of a flow state. To whatever extent you can get in flow state when you're like 14 years old, I think I did it during that game because it was like so much joy, and it was like everything just kind of came together. I wasn't really like thinking through things or making decisions. Everything just kind of flowed, and it felt very fluid. All my skills were there, and it was just fun. Like we played well together as a team. Socially, it was just like there was this feeling of elation, and we ended up winning, and I got like MVP of the tournament, and like that's a fun memory. But more so, I think the deeper kind of kernel of truth or like lesson there is being in that place where it was kind of just like low and felt bad about myself, and attaching too much of myself to that outcome, and then kind of going through this process where, hey, like even in those moments, like you have to be able to allow room for growth and for other experiences to kind of surface, because that wasn't the end of the story. And so I think that's always a cool thing and show me in my life of like, even when you have good moments and bad moments, that's not the end of the story, right? It continues. So being able to be open to what's kind of coming up, and being open to, doing that with other people. But that was like a really cool experience where I was like, oh man, like everything kind of came together in that game, and I really experienced a lot of joy playing a game that I
Yeah.
love.
What's your favorite way to recharge after a tough day or a tough week?
Oh man, I'm very introverted. I love to be alone. So if I could just like go read a book or like write by myself or just be alone and think. Um, I love to shoot hoops. So that was always like therapy growing up for me, is just be by myself and shoot some baskets in the driveway. So if I can just go to like a basketball gym and shoot some hoops and unwind for a little bit, or if I can
Hmm.
just, go outside and be by myself. I'm very introverted, so anything kind of by myself. I love silence and just kind of getting away from everything for a little while.
Hmm. Your guilty pleasure food?
Pepperoni pizza.
Wow.
Yeah. I like to think of myself as a clean eater, but yeah, every day of the week, if I have an opportunity to chow down on just like a good pepperoni pizza, because there's yeah, you say guilty. There's some pizzas where you're like, I don't feel so guilty. I feel like that was a freshly made, there was some grandma that was like kneading the dough that really put everything into that pizza, and then there's some pizzas that are just like a New York style pizza, like big slices, greasy. You don't want to know where it came from. Like that's more of what I'm talking about. Something that doesn't make you feel great after, but in the moment, it's like the best thing ever.
Yeah. Yeah. Favorite sport movie all time?
Man, that's tough. My brother and I, growing up, used to watch this movie Goal. I'm sure there's other ones where I really thought about it for a long time that were maybe more of my favorites, but it was a soccer movie, and we really liked that one. It was kind of like a come-up story. All kind of classic sports movies are like where the athlete doesn't really have a chance, and they end up making it, right? And kind of, being this kind of figure of honor and respect and athletic success. But that was like a really cool kind of story and come-up story that I like. So Goal would be the movie that I like. It was a soccer movie.
Good. And finally, David, if you need to give to our listeners an advice or a piece of wisdom on any topic.
Oh man, I think something. And this, I'm like speaking to myself right now. I say and I'm going to speak to myself. I'm going to use the language as if I'm speaking to myself, but don't take myself too seriously, right? You can say that to yourself. I can say don't take yourself too seriously. But I think we do that a lot of times. We put all the pressure on ourselves and think we need to do it all and be it all and feel the weight of the world. And I feel it, man. I'm, relatively young and, I'm married and have kids, and it can be easy for me to spin myself into that. And as much as I'm helping athletes, right, doing, podcasts and talking to people, it's like I feel it just as much as the next person. Some burden or, I'm making more of something than I need to because I've put this pressure on myself, and kind of this weight. So I'd say, not taking ourselves too seriously is kind of some wisdom that we can all ground ourselves in, especially when things feel overwhelming.
Great. David Durand, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great. I really appreciate it.
And before we wrap up, David, can you tell our listeners where they can contact you, learn more about your work, or connect with you online?
Yeah, sure thing. So if they go to my website, which is realdevelopment.org, from there they can learn more about me, and I have my email, david@realdevelopment.org, on there, my phone number. They can send me a text or call. So that's a good way to contact. And then a link to my book is up there. If you go to the website, it'll pop up at the top, so you can check that out. It's on Amazon. But I also have some cool resources before you pay for the book. If you just want to check out some of the free resources, other things I've written, or read some blog posts, I think there's some cool stuff that's on there. But yeah, checking out the website will be a great way to get in touch with me, or just kind of further explore some things that we talked about today.
Fantastic. To our listeners, thank you for joining this conversation with David Durand. His insights remind us that sports are about more than winning. They're about resilience, growth, and connection. I leave you with a few words from William James. The great thing in all education is to make our nervous system our ally instead of our enemy. Stay tuned for more episodes of the Pre-Zero Sports Talk podcast. Until next time, keep learning, growing, and inspiring others. Bye-bye.